You are listening to Changes Big and Small. This is Demian, your host, as we explore what makes change exhilarating. Each episode, we'll meet one person who's found freedom by embracing change. Today, I'm speaking with Bogdan Copil. Bogdan is an entrepreneur in not one, but two different areas. In our conversation today, we talk about Bogdan's journey from being a teacher to being an entrepreneur and his passion. During the conversation, he shares some great tips for aligning goals and actions, his approach to balance, and his thoughts on what it takes to be an entrepreneur. We finish off with a discussion of how support helps with change and his advice for setting goals. Let's get started. Hi, Bogdan.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. Tell us what you do. Where were you born? Where do you live? And what do you do that pays the bills?
I am from Romania originally, and right now I am based in Prague. For 7 years, I call Prague my home. I was a teacher when I moved here. And then 4 years and a bit ago, I've changed gears and I've changed direction. I stopped teaching. And now I'm doing trainings for Google for Education. I'm a Google for Education certified trainer. So now I'm still working with schools and teachers, but now the teachers are my students. So I'm still very much connected to the school, international schools all over the world. I'm traveling quite a bit. And this is one of my main activities, so to say. This is what keeps me busy and on the road quite a lot. I just came back to Prague after a month away. Besides the trainings, I'm also working with essential oils. And this is sort of my passion, my sole passion, and also my connection with chemistry because I'm a chemist. I'm combining the geeky side of me with still, once again, sort of education, because what I'm doing is I'm showing people how to use them, helping them understand what they are, how they work, and so on and so forth.
How I know Bogdan is because we both used to teach at the same school. And one of the things that I remember about Bogdan is kids quite liked his classes because of chemistry and his passion for chemistry. So it's great to hear about the use of essential oils as being part of his current endeavors. Tell me, how did you get into essential oils?
Well, it was more like, you know, when you buy a book and you leave it on your bookshelf for years and you see it every now and then, and 10 years later, all of a sudden you feel the urge to read that book. And when you read the book, you realize, oh, this is exactly what I needed right now. And there was an explanation for why I bought it so long time ago and I never read it. It was sort of something like that. So I had heard about them for a long time now, I think back in 2008, 9, something like that. A friend of mine was working with them and he was really enthusiastic, and whenever we met, he was telling me about them, and then I kept bouncing into them one way or the other. And then at some point in 2013, when I was away for my Christmas holiday, I've met again with that friend who first introduced me to oils, and the rest is history. It's, as I said, just like with that book that you read 5-10 years later. We spent a whole night talking about them. He showed me oils. I smelled oils. I've played with them. And I said, okay, let me give them a go. And that's how I started. But then what got me really passionate about them was that, okay, I had ordered some oils. I was using them for the smell in the room and whatnot, but that was about it. But then my grandfather got very ill. And basically, the doctors told us that he has an infection that's antibiotic resistant, and we should find some other ways to help him because they cannot prescribe any more antibiotics. So that's when the chemist in me surfaced, and I started digging for research. And one of the papers I found was essential oils as alternatives to antibiotics for antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And long story short, some of the oils helped my grandfather get back on his feet. And that was the moment when I said, yes, that's something that I want to use more and I want to tell people about.
That's amazing. I think that that's true in the universe, that sometimes we don't know why we encounter something at a point in our life. And it may even be that if you had read the book 5 or 10 years ago, it wouldn't have been the right time. Have you had other experiences with serendipity, where a confluence of events leads to an experience that was just what you needed at the moment?
Oh yeah, there were lots of such events, and some of them were totally random, but some of them were, as you said, exactly what was needed at the right time. And I have a long list of such events, from going to Paris when I was still a student, without having a hotel booked, without having any accommodation sorted, knowing that I want to reach a concert, and everything just got sorted out flawlessly when I got there, including up to the point where on the flight, when they were serving the meal, they brought some vegetarian meals to my neighbors, and they were like, "We don't want this, we never ordered vegetarian meals." And then I go, "Well, I could have it because I'm vegetarian, but I didn't order a vegetarian meal back then." And it was so funny because they had 3 vegetarian meals, which were mistakenly ordered, and there were 3 of us, all of us vegetarian. So up to this kind of details, when everything, as you said, serendipity, or just things aligning perfectly. And there were lots of moments.
What were you doing before you came to Prague? What was going on then?
So I was still teaching. I was teaching at an international school in Bucharest, and I was planning to actually, as you said, make a change and to stop teaching in the classroom and start having my own workshops, like fun science workshops and things like that for kids. So sort of like an after-school activity or weekend activity or summer camps and things like that. So I was still very much passionate about the idea of teaching, or let me rephrase that, not teaching, but learning, because I'm a big fan of self-directed learning. And I was also working, as a parenthesis, with the Alternative University in Bucharest, who developed a whole self-directed learning model. So that was something that I was trying to combine with my passion for chemistry and my passion for education. So having the kids in the workshops meant, yes, we could have had fun with blowing up things and burning and playing with all the chemical reactions, but also that would have been used as a base to have conversations with them about learning and how they structure their learning, like even comparing chemical reactions or processes with your own learning process or things like that. So that was sort of my, I don't know if I should call it hidden agenda or one of my end goals as well.
What would you say is the biggest change that you've made in your life?
Definitely coming to Prague was one of the big changes, or the biggest changes, because I had to change almost overnight, basically almost everything. I had 3 weeks to decide and to move, and in those 3 weeks I was away for a summer camp for 1 week in the mountains without phone signals. But I would say the bigger change was related to me leaving my hometown when I was 14 years old. I was passionate about chemistry, so really geeky. And in Romania, we have what we call the Olympiads for different subjects. So you go for a competition within your school, and then within your city, and then within your district, and then at the national level. And I had gotten the first prize on the national level for the chemistry Olympiad. So then I received a scholarship from a private high school in Bucharest. That meant I would have to move from home, which was 12-13 hours away by train. And I'm saying that this was the biggest change because I was mama's boy. So I hadn't really left home till that age. I was away for 1 week for a volleyball camp and several days with school trips, but that was it. I was very fond of my parents, and I would say not very independent. And me deciding to go there was one of the biggest changes, because that triggered the whole cascade of other changes. And for me also to change my mindset and just approach to life in general.
With change, there is both maybe loss as well as opportunity. When you encounter a new change, are you afraid? How do you deal with it, even knowing that there is both loss and opportunity?
Oh, yes. I mean, that's something that is natural, I think, for everybody. And like even when I left my teaching job here in Prague, so that was the moment when 4 years ago I said, hey, I want to change track. Even though I had a general direction in which I was heading and I knew what I would be doing next, you still have that moment of, hey, what have I just done? Or, hey, this is real now, so what's happening? So that fear is natural, I would say, and it's the same with anything and everything you're trying to do. The key factor for me is not neglecting or pretending that fear is not there, but trying to diminish the time I spend in that state of fear, let's say, or that state of paralysis. The main thing for me was, yes, acknowledge that fear, acknowledge that discomfort at the end of the day, but don't let it run you over for more than needed. Just start doing things.
So it sounds like you like to act. That's the main thing that helps you overcome some of the fears or the potential paralysis that can occur when you're making a change.
Yes. I just want to clarify something. I like to act, but I like to act in the direction of, I would say, my dreams. Not just act in terms of let's do something to keep ourselves busy so we forget about the fear or about how stressed we might be or about the worries. So when I say act, I'm really talking about acting, even if it's a small change, even if it's a small 1% change daily, just act, do something that will get you closer to your dream, I would say, or to your goal or to your destination. And because just action without a direction or without structure can be equally detrimental. We all know procrastination is here for everybody.
I think it's very important to make sure that you're acting deliberately and with a goal in mind.
One of the ways that I do that is to schedule things into my calendar. What are some of the strategies that you have for making sure that you're always moving towards your goal with your actions?
Well, I'm approaching it from two different points of view. So organizing activities, yes, use the tools that work for you. Be it a paper calendar, if that works for you, or a paper journal or notebook, whatever, or use an online tool. So I'm using Google Calendar a lot. And yes, I did have some sessions on that as well in my trainings. And not only Google Calendar, but other tools as well. Just find a tool that works for you to help you even just remember what you have to do. Or the flip side of the coin is what you've promised yourself you would do. Because when you schedule it, even the simple act of scheduling something for the next day, let's say, diminishes a bit that risk of you procrastinating in front of your laptop or your Netflix. Of course, it's something that you have to stick to, talking about action. So it's not enough to just put it in the calendar and then ignore it. That will never work. But definitely it helps keep things in the back of your mind. So using a tool. The second thing that works for me is batching things up. Because I'm doing so many different things, if I would just do everything like all the time, it would just end up in a big mess. And I'm saying this also from a biological perspective, as much as my students were trying to convince me that they are perfect at multitasking. Biologically speaking, we are not built for multitasking. So anytime we swap from one activity to another, we lose a lot of resources, focus, power, and so on and so forth. So what I'm trying to do is to batch things up, meaning that if I need to do something for the Google trainings, I will batch a 2-hour slot or 3-hour slot, let's say, and I would work only on that. The same thing with emails. Emails is one of the biggest time sinks and productivity blockers out there, because in most cases you allow email to run your day rather than basically you organizing your day and then finding times during the day when you read your emails. So it's a lot about being very intentional, as I said, with what you're doing and about the tools. So that's one perspective. The other perspective is, and it's not really necessarily time management related, but it's more of a mindset, daily hygiene, I would say. It helps a lot to spend some time in the evening thinking about the next day, looking at, okay, what do I have on the calendar, and just, I'm not talking about over-analyzing everything and going in detail, but just knowing what's coming. And the same thing in the morning, but in the morning with a greater focus on, okay, envisioning what you're actually going to do in that time interval when you have scheduled that activity or whatever you've scheduled.
People talk a lot about having balance. What's your approach to that?
I don't believe in balance. Not when it comes to my life, at least. Let me compare it with forces and science, right? When the forces are balanced on an object, the object either stays at rest or carries on going in the same direction. There is no change. I don't agree with the idea of balance in your personal life, because if everything would be balanced and everything would be perfect, there would be no change, no growth, no opportunity for you to find new ideas, new projects, new connections, new opportunities. And that's why I'm looking at it from the scientific perspective. I made that analogy with the balanced forces. What I strongly believe in, though, is seasons. And I've been talking about this quite a bit. To give you some background, my parents were farmers. So I've learned a lot about what happens on a farm during every season. And there's a time and a place for everything. There's a time when you hustle and you work 10, 12, 14 hours a day and you plant the seeds for what's coming next. And then you tend your crops and then you harvest. And then there's a time for rest. Where you enjoy, of course, there still is some work, and of course, you still have to take care of the animals and everything else on the farm, but there's less work on the field. I'm talking about winter mainly. And then there's more time spent with your family indoors, next to the fireplace, and then the Christmas is coming and so on and so forth. So I strongly believe in this as well with everything else. I don't believe that you can be in a state of balance the whole year or your whole life. What I do believe in is periods of, I would say, hustle or intense work, or call it however you want, followed by periods of rest and anything else. Now, what I'm not saying, so please don't hear it in this way, I'm not saying go all in for a week or 2 or 3 and work and ignore everything else, ignore your friends, ignore your family, and ignore taking care of yourself. That's not what I'm saying. Of course, I'm trying to be mindful of what I'm eating, who I'm seeing, and so on and so forth, even in those periods when I'm really focused on, I would say, work or just growing those seeds. So yeah, long story short, I don't believe in balance. I believe more in, as you said earlier, deliberate effort, deliberate practice, followed by periods of rest.
One of the challenges is that other people in your life may not realize what your priorities are, and they may have a different idea of how you should be spending your time. So we were discussing about clarity with yourself and also with the people around you. During times of a lot of work, how do you communicate this?
Well, I really like the fact, first of all, I like the fact that you've mentioned clarity, because that's also something connected to my shift from being a teacher to being a freelancer entrepreneur. In that month right after, of course, I had to communicate with people around me and tell them, hey, okay, this is what happened and this is what I'm planning to do next. But I also needed clarity for myself, first of all. And this is where I realized that no matter what I do, be it communicating with others or setting up my own goals or starting new projects or saying yes or no to new projects, it first starts with me. I have to know really well what I want, and I have to have clarity in what I'm trying to do. I'm not talking about every single step. That will take me there. Once again, don't get in the paralysis by analysis state by trying to figure out every single step. But I'm talking about knowing what I really want and what's really important for me, and also what's non-negotiable. Because you will always have other people around you which, as you said, might depend on you, or who are just your friends and want to see you, or your family members, and so on and so forth. Or you might have new projects which could be tempting, but might bring you to a spot where you burn yourself out because you said yes to too many things. That did happen to me after I left teaching. And that was another episode. So I would say clarity with yourself, and then openly communicating about these things. As you said, you've mentioned communicating, but that's one of the biggest issues. That's not happening in most cases. We sort of tend to minimize how important even a short phone call is, saying, hey, I'm in this period of hustle. Understand where I am. This is what I'm doing. This is the plan. I'm still here for you when you need me, but just be aware that maybe in the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, month, 2 months, whatever, you will see less of me. So when we see each other, let's try to make that the best quality time. This is also in my nature of being quite open, sometimes even blunt when I talk to people. And this worked with some people, with others, it didn't. And what I mean is that they got upset and they couldn't understand why all of a sudden there was this change and so on and so forth.
I've heard several people say that when you're an entrepreneur, especially starting out, you tend to say yes to everything. And you mentioned that you did experience some burnout because of that. Would you like to share more about that?
just know yourself well enough so you find mechanisms that help you avoid this kind of risks or dangers to just get stuck in the work and just forget about everything else. So that's why I'm saying it's all about exploring yourself as well and your limits and knowing where you're going, but also setting up mechanisms that would help you avoid getting trapped. Now, in terms of the burnout episode or what happened there, as I said, after I left school, all of a sudden I had all of this time and I had big dreams and I wanted to create so many things. And it was one of those cases when an opportunity comes your way and you have to decide what happens. Do I take it or do I not take it? I was mentioning earlier the Alternative University from Bucharest. It's a project that was very dear to my heart. I was actually working with them since 2011 as a volunteer. They needed somebody to join the core team. There was only one issue. This was in Bucharest, and I was still based in Prague. And so I ended up living for almost a year. I was about 40% of my time in Prague, about 40% of my time in Bucharest, and the rest of 20% somewhere else traveling with the Google trainings. And even though both activities were great and I loved working with the Alternative University, I loved doing the Google trainings, and on top of that I was also working with the oils, at some point it just became too much. Everything put together, traveling, having rents into countries, doing all of this work in different projects, always going over time with what I was doing for the Alternative University. And obviously I ended up slightly burnt out after that academic year. And that's when I also got to a point where I had to make a big change again. And I left the team before the end of my agreed year. So I was supposed to be there for a full year, and I actually had left a bit earlier. The story is a bit longer. It wasn't only me, it was also what else was happening around in the project. But that was one of my key lessons. It's great giving back, because for me this wasn't really an income generating activity. Rather, I was spending money out of my pocket to be there, just because I had to take in the flights and the rent and everything else. It wasn't volunteering either, so it was somewhere in between. But I started from the idea that I want to give back, I want to help out, and now that I have all of this time, I could do that. And that was the biggest mistake after I left my full-time job. I would say just because I ended up burnt out, and it took me a while to realize that in order for me to help others and give back, I have to be first in a place where I'm settled, everything is okay with myself, and I'm okay with my mindset, with my finances, with my health, with everything else.
One of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you is because I can see from afar that you really go for things that you're interested in, that you make changes when things are not going quite the way that you'd like them to, or doesn't match your vision. Often people will say, "Oh, you're so brave to have made a change in your life."
I'm curious about the difference between the people who actually make a change in their life and those who are unhappy with things but don't make any changes.
One of my friends said that maybe there's not enough pain associated. I don't know if that's true. I think some people are comfortable in their pain and they still won't make a change. What's your idea about this? What drives you to change?
Well, in this episode, it was clearly pain. I had gotten to a point where it was painful for myself. And yeah, indeed, like if you look around, pain is one of the biggest, I would say, motivators in this kind of situations. And now when you said that some people like the pain and they feel comfortable in it, that's true in many cases. I have just remembered, I don't know who, one of the motivational speakers was talking about a dog sitting on a nail, and the dog was not happy about it, but yet the dog wasn't moving away. And his owner said, yeah, well, the pain is not big enough for him to move away. So I think it's a very similar situation with also what we are doing, because you tend to get comfortable in your job or I'm not talking only about jobs, but in general, in any situation you might be. And change brings with it lots of things you have to cope with. And that's something that you should be aware of, like changing jobs, changing cities, changing countries, changing whatever. That will inevitably bring lots of challenges. So I do think that pain is one of the issues. Pain in terms of people being comfortable in their pain or in their discomfort. But the other thing is, in many cases, you're not even aware of that pain or that discomfort because it became such a normal thing or such a routine for you that you're not even aware of it. So I would say that the level above would be awareness, just being aware of what's happening in your life and knowing what's right for you. And this takes a lot of work with yourself, first of all, be it whatever, personal development, mindfulness, meditation, yoga, religion, whatever is your method of choice or whatever works for you. I think this is where you should start. I know myself quite well because I've been working on all of these things. I was trying to find where are my limits and what are my core values and where do I stand. So what I'm saying is know your limits and know how you react to things and where you stand so you find workarounds if that's the case. The other thing is quite a lot of people approach me after I started this journey of entrepreneurship, freelancing, and so on and so forth. And they were like, oh, I want to do that as well. And with few of them, when I sat down and I had conversations and I started telling them like, hey, what you're trying to do compared to what you're doing at your job means this. You'll have to find your customers. You'll have to manage your time. You'll have to market yourself. You'll have to do the sales. You'll have to do this and this and this and this. And they were like, oh, but I don't want to do that because I'm not good at it. Like, you have two options. You either get good at it, you learn how to do it, or you work with somebody else who helps you in those fields where you're not excelling or just that's not your field. And I'm like, oh, but I don't want to do that. It's so much work. And that's the next thing, the work. It is a lot of work. And that's something that you might not anticipate or you might not just realize how much work it can be, especially at the beginning, until you get some systems in place and until you find your rhythm and until you find the tools that you need to help you save time. So pain, awareness, work, and bravery, I would say, which is not bravery for me, but just action despite the fear.
Actually, it connects to the next question. What would your advice be for somebody who feels stuck and who's not sure how to get out of that situation? You've mentioned some of the things that people need to consider, especially about clarity, self-awareness, considering how much comfort or discomfort you're willing to put up with. Do you have anything else to add to that?
Yes. One thing that helped me a lot was realizing that I'm not alone in this and finding support circles. So actually, before finding support circles, what I would say is audit your circles. Look who's around you and what value are they bringing in your life, and decide if maybe it's the time to shift some circles around. And I'm not talking about cutting ties. I'm just talking about giving more time to those people that are supporting your dream, your vision, your growth, rather than spending it with maybe your friend who only wants to take you out in the club and gossip about your other friend. I'm just giving a silly example, dramatizing a bit here. But I think this is really important, auditing your circles, because one of the reasons people get stuck is, as you said, also in a job, let's say, you tend to end up in the same, spending time in the same circle with the same people who have the same problems and have a similar outlook on life. So it's always helpful to bring in a new perspective, a fresh perspective. And that could mean, let me meet some new people and let me get in touch with people that are successful in the field that I am maybe dreaming of getting into. It's about, once again, finding your priorities and finding what helps you at that given point on your journey. So if you want to become a chef and none of your friends are chefs, of course, it would help you if you'd have somebody that's a chef, either as a friend, or if not, you don't have to find a chef friend, but you can spend time online looking at what chefs are doing, or you can get into a cooking class. Once again, it's one thing that you can do to bring in a fresh perspective into what you're doing. But the other thing is also finding support groups, which could mean mentoring groups or coaching groups or whatnot, and even finding a coach or a mentor that could help you. Now, there's a big difference between coaching and mentoring. So once again, you get to a point where you have to sort of know what you need. But this whole journey can be an exploration as well, because especially when you start, what's mentoring, what's coaching, you might have no idea. And that's the whole point of you trying things out, shifting things in your circles, spending more time, like even when you're online, rather than watching Netflix or binging YouTube. Just find a YouTube channel with information in your field and decide to spend every day half an hour learning those things and then starting to implement them. So once again, it's those 1% small changes. In this case, you're not physically changing your circles, as in you're not bringing a new person, but you are sort of connecting with that YouTube channel creator or whoever is delivering that information. Read books, connect to people, just send emails, find somebody you admire, send them an email and like, hey, I'm really impressed with what you're doing. I'd love to have a chat. What I'm advising you not to do though is to just send that email and not have any idea about what you're expecting from that meeting. So even if your expectation is like, hey, I'm totally stuck and I could do with some advice in terms of what you did to get here, or what you could tell me to get me out of this situation, or I just want to learn as much as possible from you, so maybe you could be my mentor in the future, and so on and so forth. But once again, have an open mind to that as well.
I think this is a good ending point. You've been very generous with us in terms of sharing some of your own journey and your advice for people who may be interested in making a change as well. Before we end, do you have any last things that you'd like to share?
When you set goals, try to make a difference between short-term and long-term goals. Make the long-term goals the biggest possible goals out there, even though they might seem scary, impossible to achieve, or whatever. It's just like the peak of the mountain you see in the distance. You know it's there, and that keeps you motivated. But don't try to get to the peak overnight or just in 2 hours, because that will get you burnt out.
Thank you, Bogdan.
You can connect with Bogdan on social media. He uses Bogdan Learns in all places. He is most active on Facebook, but you can also check him out on Instagram or on Twitter. He's currently building his site at bogdancopil.com. Check out the show notes for links. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Changes Big and Small. For more great episodes like this one, don't forget to hit subscribe in your favorite podcast app. This will let you automatically download new episodes every week. I leave you with this final thought. What can you do today to get to know yourself better? Have a great day, everyone.